Bienvenidos. Welcome to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute's 2022 Education and Economic Empowerment Summit. My name is Marco Davis. I'm the president and CEO of CHCI, and I'm so glad to have you all here with us today. Just a quick note, in case you're not aware, we're also filming today's session. We will have this video available up within about a week for any of your colleagues and peers who aren't able to join us. In case you weren't able to capture any of the wonderful comments that are made today, you will be able to go back and revisit the fabulous discussions that we're going to have today. We're going to hear from members of Congress, from senior administration officials, from corporate executives, from thought leaders, advocates, and experts talking about two topics: education and economic empowerment. Tomorrow, we're also going to come right back here and talk about another important issue, health. We hope you'll join us tomorrow as well. But for today, let's start with education. It's the first half of our day. Education has always been an integral part of our daily lives. It's critical to a family's long-term well-being. But over the last few years, we've seen how COVID exposed the disparities that existed already when it comes to Latinos in education. I'm sure we all remember the shocking visuals of students sitting outside of fast food restaurants just to access Wi-Fi and to complete their assignments. From navigating a global pandemic, to advancements in technology and virtual learning, to fast-changing student demographics, to the increasing need for a pipeline of culturally competent and diverse educators, and beyond, the past 2.5 years have made a lasting impact on our nation's classrooms, inside and out. Moreover, the COVID-19 outbreak aggravated existing inequality in the United States and around the world, and prompted questions about wealth disparities between many in the Latino population and their white counterparts. Which leads me to the second half of our day, economic empowerment. Wealth disparities in our nation remain a critical issue, especially for Latino and Black communities. According to a recent study, the median white family has 41 times more wealth than the median Black family, and 22 times more wealth than the median Latino family. Factors like lower rates of home ownership, poor credit, a lack of investment and retirement accounts, and outsized student debt all play a major role in our country's wealth gap. So, during today's Education and Economic Empowerment Summit, we will engage in conversations about the power of Hispanic serving institutions, about STEM education, about the role of fintech in growing our economy, about digital infrastructure, and how to bring more Latinos into the tech industry, and what all of that means for our community and the nation. We're deeply grateful to all of our partners for making this year's Education Economic Empowerment Summit possible. And if you're not already familiar, please do join us, follow us on social media, and comment today using the hashtag CHCI Summit. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy our discussions today. So now let's begin with our opening plenary. On behalf of all of us here at CHCI, I would like to thank the New Schools Venture Fund, the League of Women Voters, the American Federation of Teachers, and the National Education Association for their generous support of this plenary session. And before we get into the conversation with our illustrious panel that you'll hear from in a minute, we're going to hear some welcome remarks from our keynote speaker. Let me tell you just a little bit about our keynote speaker. He brings extensive policy leadership, expertise, and a lifelong commitment to advancing educational equity and opportunity. His distinguished career in public service includes senior government roles across 2 presidential administrations, including on the White House Domestic Policy Council and in the U.S. Senate for the late Senator Edward M. Kennedy. Over the past 2 decades, he's played a key role in virtually every major education policy effort and legislative reform at the national level. His dedication to education began by elevating the voices of Latino families, students, and educators. And perhaps because of this commitment to serving our community, I am truly fortunate to be able to call him not only a former colleague, once upon a time we were contemporaries at the organization that is now Unidos US, but also to count on him as a dear friend. So it's my distinct pleasure to welcome the Assistant Secretary for Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Education, the Honorable Roberto Rodriguez.
Thank you. Good morning. Muy buenos días. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you so much, Marco. Muchas gracias. It's great to be part of today's summit. I want to thank the entire team here at CHCI for hosting today's important conversation. Thank you all for coming out and for being present. Thank you for those online who are joining us. This is such an important conversation. I'm honored to lend my voice to this distinguished panel and get us started with some of the conversation that we're going to have today. As we explore these topics, today's conversation sits at the nexus of the economy and education, two topics that go hand in hand, because we know so well that the future path of our country is being decided today in schools and in classrooms, on college campuses, and it's being determined largely by how well we support the education, the advancement, the well-being, and the success of our Latino learners at every level, from early childhood education all the way through our elementary and secondary schools, through higher education and adult education. And Latinos they already account for a growing share of our economy. By the end of this decade, we will represent 1 in every 5 workers in our economy. So we have a great deal of work ahead to fulfill this promise. And fortunately, we have a leader in President Biden who recognizes that our path forward lies in unlocking the potential and the promise of education as the engine for upward mobility, as the pathway to a stronger economy and to a better future for our Latino community as a whole. So, over the next few weeks, our schools around the country will be winding up yet another school year that has been marked by the effects of this pandemic, the effects of COVID. Over 99% of our schools today are open for full-time in-person learning. That is thanks to and a testament to the hard work of our educators and our parents and our system leaders and our principals. And our administration has stayed focused over the last 16 months squarely on this charge because we knew how important it was to be able to get our learners back to in-person, full-time learning, not to mention the relationships with those around them in their schools and with their peers. And we've moved that needle from 46% of our young people back in school to nearly 100% today. But still, over the past 2 years, COVID has presented perhaps one of the most significant disruptions that we have seen in American education. Right? We know its compounding effects have taken a toll, particularly on our Latino communities, on health, on education, on housing, on economic mobility and stability. And they've exacerbated some of the inequities that we know already existed prior to this pandemic for our students. 6 in 10 Latinos reported financial hardships during the pandemic. We were 4 times more likely to be hospitalized due to COVID. And our students canceled their college plans at nearly double the rate of white students. So that great disruption continues to pose some challenges. It continues to take a toll on the academic growth progress, on the social and emotional well-being of our students, on their mental health. And this is why a full recovery from that pandemic has to be priority number 1. We've worked, and thankfully Congress has answered President Biden's call to infuse a historic $122 billion in our K-12 schools across the country, now dispersed across our states. $40 billion to support over 5,000 higher education institutions, helping our colleges and universities get our students back on path in pursuit of their college degree. And we've been hard at work to try to make those dollars put them to work to meet the more immediate needs of our students, promote their success, and do so in a way that particularly helps to support our most under-resourced schools. That means we're putting $30 billion to work to help our students recover academically. We're looking at high-dosage tutoring programs, after-school enrichment programs, opportunities for summer learning. We're looking at investments of over $26 billion in helping to address our staff shortages in our schools, helping to staff and support educators and teachers in our classrooms. Over $8 billion to support the physical and mental health of our students. And while this great disruption has really posed unthinkable challenges, at the same time it has the potential, we believe, to be one of the greatest catalysts, and a catalyst for resetting our education system, to bring a greater focus on equity in that system, to bring students' needs and more of a student-centered approach to our schools, and to think about how we harness innovation, how we meet those opportunities to utilize technology and other innovations in our classroom to support student learning and success. That vision that's been backed by our Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, by our entire administration, would reimagine a system that is worthy of our students' aspirations, of their best. It is a system that will place equity at the North Star of how we approach questions around teaching and learning and the distribution of resources and the support of our educators. And it's a vision that has the opportunity, we believe, to shape generations to come in our system. It's backed by a bold budget proposal. Some of you follow these numbers. We've never seen such a historic proposal, $88 billion, a 16% increase in our education budget that the President more recently put forth earlier this spring. And the vision is looking at several priorities that will set the course for our future. It sets out to support the whole child at the heart of this recovery. That means doubling down on the mental health infrastructure in our schools, because we know that our students are 6 times more likely to access mental health services if they're provided in our schools versus in our community. Right? It looks to serve more of our students with a whole child approach by opening over 800 new full-service community schools that would reach over 2.4 million more students. It looks to help support more mental health professionals and school counselors and social workers and school psychologists in our schools. Double the number of those professionals working on behalf of our students. And it looks to partner more actively at the federal level. Our department's working very closely with Secretary Becerra's department at Health and Human Services, for instance, to unlock and unleash some funding from Medicaid to help support this type of comprehensive approach to recovering and supporting the well-being of our students. So let's meet our young people where they are, address their comprehensive needs in responding to this pandemic. Let's also more boldly address the opportunity and achievement gaps that we've seen and lived with in our system for too long. Because we can't settle for a system that predetermines a young person's opportunity based on where they grow up, or their language that they speak, or their race, or the amount of money that their family earns. This means growing funding for our Title I schools, where the majority of our Latino students learn, as a down payment on the President's goal to triple funding for Title I. It means focusing more squarely on equity as we distribute those resources so that those dollars get down to our classrooms and our schools that need them the most. It means growing preschool and childcare, because as a Latino community, we are the youngest community, and we are the one that lacks access to high-quality preschool and early education, more disproportionately than any other American community. It also means supporting our English learners, our dual language learners, by growing by 1/3 our investment federally in the Title III program, and better focusing that program on the high-quality bilingual education that we know works and growing our bilingual education workforce, to recognize and leverage the assets, the language, the background that our young people, that our children and their families bring to their learning. This vision sets out to make significant investments in attracting, growing, and supporting a diverse and talented pipeline of teachers. That is one of the most single important resources that we can deliver our young people for their future. 1 in 4 of our public school students today are Latino, and yet Latinos make up less than 1/10 of the education workforce, about 9%. You look at Latino male teachers, less than 5% in our schools. We have to do better. We have to do better to prepare, support, attract, and retain a new generation of diverse and talented teachers in our schools. We can begin by growing programs at the federal level that we know work toward that end. Programs like our Teacher Quality Partnership Program that prepares candidates through effective pathways, teacher residencies, grow your own programs. By funding programs like the Hawkins Centers of Excellence program. This is a program Congress has most recently provided funding for the first time in the most recent omnibus. We'll prepare a new generation of teachers of color through our Hispanic serving institutions and our historically black colleges and universities. Those higher education institutions prepare over half of our diverse teachers currently in the workforce, and they do it very well. We can also double the Teach Grant from $4,000 to $8,000 to better support our teachers who commit to teaching in high-need fields and in our neediest schools. This vision also sets out to make higher education more inclusive and affordable. Our administration has already taken historic actions to address college affordability, to open those doors of higher education wider for more of our students. And we know that despite this pandemic's disruption, if we look back over the past 12 years, the rate of enrollment in higher education for the Latino community has grown faster than any other demographic. We can't let costs, financial barriers, get in the way of going to and completing a degree. We cannot afford to let that financing be a burden in the lives of our students for their entire first part of the career, for some for their entire career. Earning that college degree has to be a pipeline and a down payment on our country's future. So we are already getting started. We've canceled more than $17 billion in debt for over 725,000 borrowers. We were able to do that over the past 16 months just using our executive authority as an administration. We've extended the pause, as many of you know, in student loan repayment. That saves 41 million borrowers about $5 billion a month. We've fixed the public service loan forgiveness program. We are calling more to public service, and we're making sure that they have opportunities to get those loans forgiven. That's 113,000 borrowers, over $6.8 billion. When we came into office, the acceptance rate through the public service loan forgiveness was less than 5%. So we've worked to try to fix that program, and we've provided $2 billion to relief to a number of students who attended schools that didn't deliver their promise on education. The Pell Grant, one of the most important foundations in financing our higher education system today, over 8 million borrowers. We have sought to put that on a path to be able to be a stronger down payment in affordability. The President's proposed a nearly $1,800 increase just this year in the Pell Grant. And we're doing more to help support and invest in our historically black colleges and universities and our Hispanic serving institutions, including a nearly $90 million increase over last year's level in our HSIs. We know that that pathway is a pathway to opportunity for such a large portion of our Latino community. And finally, let's set out to set a vision that provides college readiness and career pathways and career readiness for more of our students. Because our young people don't want to learn in outdated high schools. They don't want to learn in high schools that were designed for a century bygone. They want to learn in schools that will help support their development of their skills and their knowledge for this innovation economy. They want to learn in schools that are able to provide them opportunities to earn early college credit, begin planning for their pathway of what comes next after high school earlier, begin to start to make progress toward those industry-recognized credentials that will be a down payment in today's economy for a great career. And so we've proposed a massive career-connected ed high school vision and an opportunity to retool and rethink our career and technical education system to better braid and blend that system with post-secondary success. So, a lot to do, a lot to think about and discuss today. We believe we have the opportunity in this pandemic and in the moment we're in to level up. Right? We don't have to go back to what our education system looked like in March of 2020. And if we level up and we focus on equity and we focus on putting our students at the center of this equation, it will pay off for generations to come. Doing that will take all of our voices, la voz de la gente, todos, to be able to get it done. You have a fantastic panel today to discuss some of these ideas, and I'm sure many other directions for our system, and opportunities to think about how our education and workforce and the economy sit hand in hand. So I'm grateful for the chance to lend my voice, grateful for today's panel, and thank you for inviting me to set the stage. I'm going to go ahead and welcome Marco back up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assistant Secretary Rodriguez, for your comprehensive vision for the future of education in America, for your commitment to our students, our teachers, and our families, and for seeking the investments that we need to ensure the success of Latino and all learners. We appreciate your remarks and you joining us here today. And now before we get, well, there's one more before we get to our panel. We have for each of our sessions a chair that we invite to serve as a chair for the panel from our leadership. And it's my honor to introduce the panel the chair for this panel, who is Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez. She holds a leadership role with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus as a freshman representative. She also serves as chair of the Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States for the 117th Congress. Before coming to Congress, Congresswoman Leger Fernandez worked as an attorney, an advocate, and won important legal battles to advance voting rights, promote tribal sovereignty, and protect our environment and acequia waters. And she has a heritage few can claim. She is a 17th generation Northern New Mexican. I first met the Congresswoman at a reunion of Latino alumni from our shared alma mater when she was first contemplating making a run for Congress and going into public office. I'm very glad that she did, and that she now proudly represents New Mexico's 3rd Congressional District. And as occasionally happens, unfortunately, our members of Congress get called into markups, meetings, and hearings. And so if you will, please turn your attention to the video screen for remarks from the chair of this panel, Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez.
Buenos dias. I'm Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez, representing the beautiful and beautifully diverse 3rd Congressional District of Nuevo Mexico. Welcome, everyone, to CHCI's 2022 Education and Economic Empowerment Summit. You know, education is always about investing for a better future. Unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to secure those long-term investments because we focus on short-term benefits. But we know that investment in education and a commitment to the long-term requires patience and is our obligation. You know, technology advancements in virtual learning have changed the face of our education system, but not all students have access to technology. In my district, School bus drivers did daily drop-offs of paper schoolwork to children in our rural communities during the pandemic because they didn't have access to virtual learning. Those bus drivers told me how they realized as they were dropping off schoolwork that the families also needed supplies, food, and other necessities, and so they added that to the bus route. With the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, we're going to build out broadband in that rural community so the kids now back in school can access the internet for their homework. The infrastructure bill's positive impact on Latino rural students cannot be overstated. This particular village of Native Americans and Hispanos will form part of the 28% of Latinos now enrolled in our K-12 schools. To meet these diverse students, we must begin graduating more Latino teachers who have the cultural and bilingual capacity to help our students thrive. We must invest in our Latino students and the Hispanic serving institutions that graduate the teachers of those students. As a member of the Education and Labor Committee, I'm proud to support legislation that achieves these goals, such as the Educators for America Act, which will mobilize and support states and local communities in improving the educator pipeline so that all schools have the diverse educators they should have to support student development and academic achievement. Los latinos y hispanos son el grupo minoritario que continúa creciendo en nuestro país, y eso significa que debemos continuar aumentando los estándares para educadores y currículos culturalmente competentes. Tenemos que enfatizar haciendo las inversiones necesarias para garantizar el éxito de los estudiantes latinos. Muchísimas gracias.
We are grateful to the Congresswoman for her insights and steadfast efforts to ensure our students and educators have everything they need to thrive, including infrastructure. And now to begin the discussion, I'm happy to introduce the moderator for today's conversation, an organizational leader and social entrepreneur who I'm also fortunate to count as a dear friend and colleague. Amanda Fernandez is the founder and CEO of Latinos for Education, a national organization dedicated to creating leadership pathways for emerging Latino education leaders and diversifying education nonprofit boards. She is a trustee of both the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education and Roxbury Community College, and a senior fellow at Future Ed. Please welcome Amanda Fernandez.
Muchísimas gracias, Marco. And for folks over here, there's a lot of space on this side. If you want to get a better view of the conversation, feel free to move over. It is great to be here today. See all the faces, be in person. I know we keep hearing that, but it really is true. Once you're in person, it makes a difference. I want to thank Assistant Secretary Rodriguez. And I want to thank our Representative Fernandez also for their words, because they really set the stage for our conversation today. They said many important things that we'll be spending a little time digging into and getting more specific. Some of the areas that the Assistant Secretary talked about was whole child, with an emphasis on mental health. He talked about opportunity gaps and how do we address those. He talked about diverse educator pipelines and leadership. He talked about higher ed and college readiness and career readiness programs. That is a lot of topics. So we won't be able to get to all of those, but we do want to spend some time getting into some specificity, because what the Assistant Secretary did was to set the stage, as he said. And so now we're going to dig in a little bit deeper with this esteemed panel that I'm really excited to talk with today. We're going to spend the first half of our time in conversation, and then we will open up to you all to ask some questions that might be on your mind as you listen to what this panel talks about today. So I'm just really excited to have our speakers for today. We have Noel Candelaria from the National Education Association, Francis Misano, the president of New Schools Venture Fund and incoming CEO of New Schools Venture Fund. And we have Virginia K. Solomon, who is the CEO of the League of Women Voters, people with a lot of experience and perspective. So let's dig right in. I'd love for you to say a little bit more about your role and what you do. But within that, we did hear the Assistant Secretary talk about a lot of things. Within your introduction, why don't you pick one or two things that really stood out to you as being really important to this conversation for today? Noel, I'll start with you.
Sure, thank you again, and welcome. It's great to be on this panel and be part of this very important conversation. I am Noel Candelaria. I'm a 20-year special education teacher from the great city of El Paso, Texas. And, you know, being with the National Education Association and as an educator, as a former state president in Texas, and now as the Secretary Treasurer for the largest labor union in this country, representing 3 million educators that impact the lives of 50 million children in our public schools every day, and in 14,000 different communities, and having members in literally every congressional district in this country. We know firsthand as educators the impact that this pandemic has had, especially on the Latino community. You know, our President Pringle always talks about, how her vision and her leadership and how it ties into the vision of NEA about the moment we're in right now to unite not just our members, but the entire nation, right, to reclaim public education as a common good for this nation, right, and transform it into something that it was never designed to be, which is racially and socially just and equitable, like you heard from Roberto, right? And what it means for us in this moment to look at what the future of education should look like, not just for the nation, but specifically for the Latino community that has been underserved. And so, part of what has driven me every single day since the first day I stepped into the classroom was not only the impact that educators had on my life and the opportunities that were created for me as a first-generation Latino who stepped into the classroom not knowing one word of English, but the impact that it had in my community. And how important it is to create a public school system that is reflective of an entire community and that utilizes the resources of all of the community. I was very fortunate to attend a schools in the Isleta School District, where early on we embraced what it meant to walk in already knowing 2 languages, right? Or being fluent in Spanish and building out the academic Spanish and being truly bilingual in dual language. And so the opportunities and the moment that we have right now to partner as the NEA, not just that we're doing with the Department of Education and the Biden administration to really dig deep into what it means to have a racially, socially, and equitable system of public education. But what does it mean to do it in partnership? Right, in true partnership with parents and students and educator voice at the center, along with the business community and the community at large, to leverage all of our resources as a nation to truly design that system that we know is needed for the future, not just to meet with this moment, but to actually meet the needs of future generations to come. And so I'm excited to be here and really dig deep, hopefully, into some of these specifics that Robert brought up that we're also digging into as the National Education Association with our members across the nation. So thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Francis.
Hi, everyone. Buenos dias. It's really great to be here. My name is Francis Massano, and as Amanda said, I'm president and incoming CEO at New Schools Venture Fund. And New Schools Venture Fund is a nonprofit organization that finds, funds, and supports education innovators. So what does that mean? We basically find people who have big dreams that they're cooking up, focus on how we can reimagine K-12 education. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that through this role, I was able to support innovators like Amanda. Right? The work that she is doing is focused on how do we make sure that we're accelerating Latino leadership so that we all can benefit from it, but that students of all backgrounds can benefit from it, right? So what we do is we provide that capital to help those new ideas come about. So in this moment right now, what we are thinking a lot about is what can we be doing to create a more excellent and equitable education system? What are the ideas that are emerging in communities across this country? Because I agree with you, Noel. We're at this point right now where we have parents, students, educators who are saying we cannot continue, right? This cannot be the way forward. And so what our job is to identify those leaders, because we deeply believe that the ideas exist, and it is our job to help find them, provide the capital, and provide the support to help those ideas come to life. So really excited to be here to talk more about that, because what the Assistant Secretary spoke about was the idea that we cannot go back to the way things were always before, that we need to level up, that this is our moment to harness innovation, right? For us to think about how we can create the system that we would all be proud of to have our young people be a part of, where their dreams are realized, where their aspirations are supported, where they have choice to live the lives that they choose, that they are able to dream a big dream and know that it is possible, right? And I fundamentally believe that we can create that education system, but it's gonna take all of us. So I look forward to this conversation with all of you so we can talk about the issues that are facing us right now.
Hello, buenos dias. My name is Virginia K. Solaman. I'm the CEO at the League of Women Voters of the U.S. Prior to being at the League, I was the CEO of CASA, which is the largest Latino and immigrant rights organization in the Mid-Atlantic region. When I first came to CASA, I actually oversaw their education department. And so that was my entry point into the organization. And I started my career in education, specifically around Latino and immigrant students in Hartford, Connecticut. Students who had been, unfortunately, out of school for some time, whether they were suspended or expelled. And so, I'm excited about this conversation today, and I think for me, one of the reasons why I wanted to be part of this panel, and it goes back to the remarks that we heard here earlier, it was about this idea of equity. And I think a lot of people get confused on the difference between equality and equity. And when we talk about investments, specifically in the Latino community and in Latino children, it's not giving the same that other children are receiving because they're already starting from a deficit as a result of inequality in this country. So how do we ensure that the resources that are needed, those additional resources, just to have our children be able to rise to the same level of educational outcomes as their white counterparts, how are we ensuring that those resources are being invested? How are we ensuring that Latino students are learning about their heritage, that all students are learning about the importance of what Latinos have done in this country? And most importantly for me, in my current role, it's about civics education, making sure that young people have the ability to harness their political power when they graduate from high school, when they become voters, how to engage in government, how to engage civically, so that political power can be built so that there is more opportunity to have a say in our education system, in our local government, and as elected leaders.
Thank you so much, all of you. As you can see, we've got a panel of passionate, engaged leaders in education. So first and foremost, thank you for all you do for our community, for our students, families, and in education in general. It's a lot right now. So we thank everybody who's in it. So let's dig in. So Assistant Secretary talked about whole child, and he zeroed in on mental health. And I think we all know that right now what we're seeing in education on the mental health side is staggering. In particular, Latino communities who, again, as we all know, have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Lack of access to resources. We hear it all the time amongst our systems leaders across the country that there's a shortage of mental health providers, and it's a real challenge for both students and educators in our buildings right now. So with that, I'd like to direct this question to you, Noel and Francis. Have you both talk a little bit about the ways in which you all are seeing and hearing the way our students and educators are being impacted from a mental health perspective, and what do you think needs to be prioritized to be done to address these challenges right now? Noel, I'll start with you.
Sure, thank you for that question. The issue of mental health and social emotional learning has been a priority for us at the National Education Association, even prior to the pandemic. When I was a state president, we actually held a convening on this very topic of all our state presidents a little over 5 years ago. because we were already starting to see the impact of the lack of resources and support for social and emotional learning, especially in our Black and brown communities, and the stigma associated with mental health, support. And so, of course, this pandemic exacerbated, that issue. And what we were hearing directly throughout, the entire pandemic, as our members were knocking on doors, trying to reach, our students and finding out, just the dire need, for social emotional support, even during the pandemic, right? When students were dealing with death and family because of the impact that the pandemic had in our community, and teachers not having the resources that they needed, not only themselves as educators and what we needed to do to be able to reach our students, and making sure that we had enough counselors. So for us as the National Education Association, we now see the research that confirmed what we were hearing in real time, that showed just the way that the social emotional health impacted our Latino community above and beyond every other community. And that's why for us, we have been looking at what are some solutions. We're extremely proud of the partnership we have with the Biden administration and the work we've been able to do to get those additional resources into our schools and into our communities. But at the end of the day, it's, this short-term influx of funds is going to be a down payment on a much bigger system that we need to work on building. And so for us, we've really been focused on our community schools approach. And you heard him talk about community schools, right? And so I want to take a deep dive as to what that means for us as a National Education Association. So, we're talking about being able to go into every single community in this country, and especially our Latino communities, and do a full needs assessment of that community, which includes not just the needs of our students, right, but the needs of our educators, what is needed in the school, but also the needs to support the entire community. And how do we then take that needs assessment and develop systems and programs within the school that not only supports every need of our student and being able to fine-tune what those specific needs are. So when you're talking about equity, right, we're now able to target that equity and those needs, but we're doing it in partnership with our parents. Because we know that, when we look at our community schools model, it's not just about the impact we have on students during the day, but how can we also lift up the entire community and the parents and use our school as that central hub of not only healthcare, not only education and academics, but to also lift up the entire community and leveraging the resources of the federal, the state, local government, but also the local business community. How can we bring in the mental health support into our community schools? We have models like this already across the country that we've been working with, through a lot of our locals and our school districts, where we're able to bring in these mental health supports into the community and use the school, because we know that the most trusted institution and the most trusted professionals in any community are the educators in our schools. So being able to house these systems of support for an entire community that is constantly reevaluating itself to make sure that the needs are always up to date and that we're continuing to evolve as the needs of the community evolve, and having that constant ear in the ground with social support, social emotional support, is going to be really critical as we think about creating those schools that are racially, socially just and equitable. It begins in every community and doing the needs analysis so that every child and every family has that access within footsteps of their own homes and not have to travel across cities or trying to access what we have right now in lack of transportation, but create real opportunity in every community. What we've seen with a lot of our community schools is the success of being able to bring in parents and provide adult education, help them learn how to fill out applications so that there's upward mobility with the parents of our students, so that we're creating a success and equity for not just our students, but the entire community. So, we're really excited with the administration and that partnership, but it's gonna take real partnership, not just from everyone in this room, but to go back into your communities and really partner with our schools, partner with our educators, because we're in a moment. We're in a moment in our history, we're in a moment in a critical point in our nation, where if we don't get this right, we can't go back to what we had before, because like we've heard mentioned before, it was never good enough. So we have to use this moment we have right now to not only create the systems that our students need, but also the impact that we're having around teaching truth of our own history and how important that is to create the future so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past and understand how the current systems and structures work, because they're not working for our students, especially for our Latino, Black, and Brown students. So, I think community schools for us is a huge piece of being able to deal with the larger issue.
Thank you for that specificity. Francis, what's your take?
Yeah, I can add a little bit more here, and I'll just start off with just some stats just to ground us in this. So the CDC did a survey of high school students across the country. And when you look at the data specifically for Latino students, what came up was that they said that 37% of Latino students reported having an experience with a mental health issue, right? 38% said that they experienced their parents losing their job, right? We heard the assistant secretary, I gave him a promotion, talk about the disproportionality of the experiences that Latino students have had, Latino families have had during COVID, right? And we know that we need to have, and that on top of the fact that we know that to access services, the best way to provide those services are going to be in the context of school, right? That is the best way for us to reach Latino students related to these topics of mental health, right? We also know in our community, and I think this is something we have to grapple with, that we stigmatize accessing mental health support. I found for myself, to speak quite honestly, I got my first therapist during COVID. I needed help. I was experiencing stress, but we don't have, I would say culturally in our own community, an openness to that, to seeking that kind of help. So what I want to understand is what are we going to do to destigmatize it, to make this part of the normal kind of support that we all need to make sure that we're able to thrive, to lead healthy lives, right? So when you think about that, when you think about those issues, right, how do we use the school as a center of providing that kind of support? Because otherwise, we may not be able to ensure that our young people have that access, right? But I also want to make sure that as we think about these issues, that we're not conflating social emotional learning with mental health. They're fundamentally different, right? When you think about social emotional learning, it's really about how are we able to build the competencies we need, right, so that we can have the mindsets, the habits, and skills to be successful as we enter the workforce, as we're going about realizing our dreams, putting plans in place, and executing them, right? And so what's been really, I think, exciting for us at New Schools is we've seen a trend, because we support public schools across this country, where we saw prior to the pandemic that so many more schools were integrating a deep focus on academic success as well as a focus on social emotional learning. And now the challenge is a new one. Now we're saying, keep doing that. Keep putting equity in the center as you're expanding opportunity. But now how do you think about adding in mental health support? And the truth is, we don't know how to do this. We have not been connecting our schools in the ways that we need to mental health or health professionals overall, right? But the need is greater than ever. And so, Amanda, I don't have all the solutions right now, but what I can say is we need to make sure, and granted there's funding that's becoming available for this, that we're getting much more, greater levels of access to mental health experts, yes, the social workers, yes, the school psychiatrists, but we need to make sure that we're creating the infrastructure to both recruit, support all of those mental health workers, find ways to better engage them within our school systems, but this is not something that we can just snap our fingers and do overnight. And so one of the things that we're doing at New Schools right now is that we're evaluating a number of ideas that are emerging to see which ones can we support in their earliest stages so that they can get that strong start over time, and we can think about how we can scale those solutions over time. But I don't think we're at the place where we can just go, right? And so it's going to take all of us in thinking about what do we need to do it and how do we best integrate it into our schools.
Thank you, Francis, for that. We know it's not a snap of the fingers, for sure. It's an issue that has basically just become you can't unsee the mental health challenges that are happening in our schools across the country. Just an anecdote, it was interesting to hear the Assistant Secretary talk about how they are working across departments and that they are engaging with Department of Health and Human Services, another Latino at the helm of that, which is great news. To me, that's the kind of integration we need to start seeing at all the different systems levels when we talk about how we're going to best support our students and educators. Thank you both for your comments. I'm going to shift a little bit because Virginia, discúlpame, I'd like to just bring you into this conversation a bit because as the assistant secretary was talking about the myriad of challenges that are happening right now in our country, one thing he didn't mention, which I think we're all quite well aware of, is the increased polarization happening in our politics. And it has direct bearing on, I think, the work that you do, and I'd love for you to speak a little bit about your views and focus on civic education and how you're thinking about it relative to this moment in time that we're in.
Thank you. So I will say this is probably one of the most difficult times for so many, especially if you are somebody who's an educator, teachers who just want to do their job in the classroom. But I think the importance of civics education also ties to truth in teaching history, right? And so I think one of the things that is really important, I think it's something that we need to acknowledge in this moment, is that there are people who call it critical race theory, whatever you want to call it, are using history as a political tool. And we often see, and we talk about resources and where the resources are going, but let's not deny or overlook the fact that boards of education are usually positions that people run for, or in some cases are appointed to. And the people in the Board of Education are determining allocation and resources. They're looking at the curriculum. They're looking at what is being taught. And so if our students aren't even learning about their own history because of who is in a position on that school board, it's something that is not preventable. And so I want to just say the importance of not only civic education, but for Latinos to be running for boards of education. Mm-hmm. It is so critical. And so as you think about who needs to be in the room, oftentimes it's the people who are most marginalized who are absent from the table. And a lot of times it's because people just don't know how to go about engaging in the process. And so I would say organizations like the League are great because you can plug into your local government. You can plug into your local Board of Education. You can become an observer. We have an observer corps, people who go in and just look at what's happening with the school boards in your city hall, at your state legislature. And so as we talk about civics education, there's a huge gap. It's just not happening in the classroom right now. So many students are coming out of school unprepared. They're being told register to vote at 18, but yet they don't have the ability to even understand how basic government should function, what the responsibilities of their elected leaders are. We have a case in Rhode Island right now, Cook versus Raimundo, which is 12 students came together and they're suing in Rhode Island to be able to have civics education because they said they could not understand how to navigate their local government and even the process of voting when they came out of high school. So for us, it's important not only to teach students about basic civics, about government, about how government should work, but also to teach them how to engage, because building political power in this moment is the most important thing. And we're nonpartisan organizations, so I am completely for whoever you feel best represents you, but the problem is, right now, is that not enough people understand how to engage in the process as a whole. And so that's really what we're focused on.
Thank you. That topic of engagement through the educational experience of our students really is important to the times that we're living in right now. And so thanks for talking a little bit about that. Noel, did you have something you want to add to this piece?
I wanted to add, because I think, if we look at in the last 20 years and the emphasis on high stakes testing, right, and the impact that it's had on civics and education. And so one of the biggest challenges that created is that the focus moved away from civics and education because it was not something that was on the test, right? And so when you look at our schools and the way our systems and schools are built, that is really foundational to our democracy, right? And how civics and education is being engaged in from, elementary when you're learning about student council and running for student council and how representation works, that is all part of our system, but it's been kind of pushed aside, right? And that's why we need to be able to see our schools as, you know, as that hub in that community where civic engagement begins, right? Which is why engaging parents and bringing parents and having them be crucial partners in that process so that they get to know and understand how their school works. Our students get to know and understand how you know, democracy works, because it starts within their school. I mean, the greatest social experiment and democratic experiment in this nation is actually based in our public schools. And so we need to be able to bring that back. And, you know, I'll talk about Texas because, you know, that's where I'm from. And in Texas, every school principal, by virtue of their position, is an automatic voter deputy registrar. Their responsibility is to register every single high school student when they turn 18 to be registered to vote. Those are models that we need to use. Now, do we exercise that? Unfortunately, no. I had the fortune on my 18th birthday of having Mr. Hunt as my government teacher. And you walked into his classroom on your 18th birthday, he had 2 gifts for you on your desk. And I still remember to this day, because of the impact that it had. He asked you what your favorite candy bar was at the beginning of the year. So on your birthday, you walked in, you had your favorite candy bar on your desk and your voter registration card. I've yet to miss an election, even for school board, since then, because he made that a priority in our class, right? And so we need to make sure that teachers and educators are able to have that type of access where every student is registered to vote automatically, right? When we're talking about legislation, right? How can we then push to make sure that when someone turns 18, they're automatically registered to vote? And so our schools are where that can be happening, right? And so being able to partner with League of Women Voters and other organizations at locally is how we can then make sure that we're engaging our school board so that if it's not state law, that we work to make it state law, but we also work at the local level, at the policy level, and at the worksite level to make sure that every school principal is taking on that leadership so that they're able to provide their teachers on their campuses with those opportunities to make sure that we're registering every single student to vote.
Thank you for that additional context and your personal experience, because we know how much personal experiences in education really matter to our students, and who is in front of them matters too. So I'm going to direct this next question to Frances, which is around representation in education. We heard the statistics, just about 9% of educators in the United States identify as Latino. And we know the stats with the growing demographics of our community. In my opinion, that's a mismatch. It's why Latinos for Education exists. But Frances, I know you have a lot to say on this, and I'd love for you to talk about what's happening right now with the Great Resignation affecting the education profession as well. And what are your thoughts around what we do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, can I also call you in, Amanda, to share your thoughts as well, just given all the work you're doing on this too. So a couple of things. Yes, Latinos represent 9% of the educator workforce. We know right now 44% of schools across the country are reporting they have at least one teacher vacancy. 44%. And we know it's much more than one, right? We also know that educators of color are saying that about 50% of them are saying they're likely to leave the profession. And the pipeline has been leaky, right? Before we even got to this moment in time, before the pandemic even came, there were all of these moments across the recruitment, certification process in terms of entering into schools where Latinos were dropping out because the system had not been set up for us to be successful, right? To begin with, only 8% of Latinos were actually deciding to major in education. Like, we need to understand that. Why is that? I know for me, my mom was a public school educator, and part of what she told me was like, this is hard, right? I'm not sacrificing this much for you to become an educator. We have created a stigma around what it means to be educators, when I believe it's one of the most important jobs that we can have, right? But when you think about how much you get paid, and the amount of money you need to spend to be able to get to the point where you can even become a teacher, there are things we need to do to address all of these barriers that exist at every single stage. Not to mention, once you go to a school, you may find that that community is not set up for you to be successful. You may feel that as a Latino, that you're not seen, that your different ideas are not valued, because we're not creating the culture where our difference is celebrated and viewed as a superpower, right? So we have some work to do. So when I think about kind of the changes and the solutions that are required, I'm really excited about the work that we're seeing around grow your own programs across the country. And so for those of you who may not know what that means, essentially what you're seeing are districts who are working actively with maybe high school students, maybe working with paraprofessionals, maybe working with other adults that are in school buildings, lending their talents in different ways, and providing them with pathways to help them maybe get a BA in 2 to 3 years, to get the teacher certification, to find ways where the work that they're doing in classrooms can be honored so that they can get kind of sped up in terms of getting access to a full-time teaching job. So that to me gives me some hope, some inspiration, but we're still operating within the existing system, right? And so the other things that I start to think about are like, well, what are the more systemic changes that we might need to make? We're asking educators to do more than ever before. And we even started that conversation when we said, hey, focus on mental health as well, right? We keep adding more. The job is not sustainable as it is right now, right? So one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is, how do we unbundle the role of an educator? What I mean is, how do we stop asking educators to be content expert, to be social worker, to kind of address all the broader needs, you know, a child might have, and think about the other adults who can play a really meaningful role in empowering student learning, right? So there've been a couple of ideas that have been really inspiring to me. I've seen, let's say, Springboard Collaborative as an example, the Oakland Reach. What they're doing is they're deeply working with parents and helping parents to support education at home, right? And they've had amazing results in terms of literacy outcomes, as one example. We've talked about high dosage tutoring, right? The fact that so many other adults are getting recruited into kind of education-related work to think about, how can tutoring be a part of the core academic day? What role can those adults play in addressing student learning as well? And I think there's even more work that we can do. A lot of the schools in our portfolio are piloting new approaches to bringing other adults in to think about, how do we lessen the burden on educators? So that's something where I feel like it's going to take all of us to think broadly about the range of ways that we can rethink the teaching profession. And I think that's one way in which more Latinos can enter the profession. And I know you've done a lot in the community hubs that you were helping to pull together and drive. And so I don't know if you want to share any of that, but it's powerful work, and I think we can get there.
I appreciate that. We are needing to move into the Q&A here in just a minute, but I will say, in addition to all the practice changes we're thinking about relative to the educator profession, one thing that we at Latinos for Education are doing on the policy side, in Massachusetts, where I live, we've introduced the Educator Diversity Act, which is designed to remove barriers for more educators of color broadly to enter and stay in the profession. I'm really excited about the progress that bill has made in the Massachusetts legislature. We believe that practice change and policy change need to go hand in hand for all of you policymakers in the room. We also, as an organization, have a priority on federal legislation, practice change to also increase the number of Latinos and other educators of color enter and stay in the profession. With that, we have time for a couple questions, and then we do have to wrap up. Anyone have a burning question you want to ask of the panelists? I see a hand here. Can you say who you are and what your question is?
Buenos días, Cristóbal Rodriguez, Associate Dean of Equity at Arizona State University, which is waiting on its designation to be an HSI. Fellow Strong, fellow Del Valle graduate as well.
That's
know
right.
Mr. Hunt, so we have a lot of connections Previous to going to ASU, I was Director of Graduate Studies at Howard University, where Brown v. Board is central in the legacy and the work that's done there. I carry that today to the work I do, and wherever I go across the U.S., there are huge inequities in college and career readiness. The largest school district in Arizona, for example, in its calculus college and career efforts, 2/3 white students. In its alternative school populations, 80% students of color, 2/3 Latino students. Two worlds. This plays out across the US as to who's going to college, who's tracked on to just get a GED. The question before us is, how do we drive for accountability practices and policies that center equity? Not test scores, because test scores are an outcome of inequities. So what are we doing to drive equity-centered accountability policies, either at the federal level or at the state level?
Would any of you care to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, I can start, because I mean, it's a huge complex issue, right? And it starts for Latino students to see someone that looks like them in front of them, right, as a role model. And so when we're talking about even building on the grow your own, and the barriers that currently exist to get Latinos into the classroom, when even an internship is a huge barrier, right? When you are not paying educators a paid internship, because we all know, I mean, myself as an example, I was working full-time, 3 jobs up to at one point, trying to get been paid through college, right? And so we look at some of those barriers, but we also do not talk about, you know, we talk a lot about STEM, right, in our schools, but we don't often, we talk about all the STEM careers, but we don't talk to our students about the STEM field as an educator and the pathway to, you know, to be able to now, you know, be a scientist, a mathematician, and not just go into industry, but come into the classroom to build that foundation. And so a lot of the inequities that exist that we have to look at is how do we create a strong pipeline of young Latino students that starts at the high school level, so that they can actually see that the pathway, you know, to success in math and science begins by them becoming teachers. And going back to the issue of pay, right? When you're looking at all of the STEM careers, hardly anybody looks at education as a STEM career to be a science and math teacher, right? And when you look at the pay, if we don't fix the issue around pay to bring teachers into the profession and stay in the profession. I mean, you have states like Texas, for example, where a starting teacher, depending on which district, you can come in at $40,000 a year, but then you're capped at $54,000, $55,000. A 30-year educator that's only making $12,000 to $15,000 more than a first-year teacher. So there are huge barriers when we're looking at, you know, policy issues around, you know, making sure that we're creating clear pathways, but then we're also, you know, paying educators to see that as a viable profession and making sure that we have, you know, chemistry and calculus teachers and math teachers that can teach. Because, I mean, I can tell you that knowing the content is very different than being able to teach the content. As a college student, when I worked with the Science and Engineering School, and we partnered with the College of Education to work with future engineers, they would get frustrated because math and science came so easy to them. They couldn't understand why the students weren't understanding. I said, because you have to look at it from a teacher's perspective, right? And the process of learning and teaching is very different than just knowing the content. And so, you know, the policy approaches to be able to create those pathways are going to be really, really important so that we can actually have the teachers that students can identify with and see themselves in front of the classroom.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. Well, we do have to unfortunately wrap up, but if you, at the end, if folks have questions of the panelists, feel free to come up. We do need to wrap up right now, so I just want to thank the panel for your time today. I want to thank CHCI and Marco for having us today. One word that describes how you're feeling right now about the future of education. Virginia.
Poder.
Innovate.
Optimistic.
All right, folks. Leave with those 3 words, carry those throughout your day today. It does require all of us. I see a lot of young people in the room. We need you in this education world, whether you're in education or not. We need you all to be a part of the solution here. Thank you all so much. Thanks again to the panel. Have a great rest of your day. And I believe there are panels now, there are 3 coming up that you can choose from after a short break. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.